So, welcome to our first Interintellect Salon of this series about celebrities, selfhood, identity. I want to introduce our speakers first. So, we have Tara Isabella Burton, whose most recent books are Self-Made and her novel Here in Avalon. She's also written for the New York Times, various other publications. And David Odyssey, he is a writer, he's an astrologer, and his first book is going to be coming out in March. So I wanted to thank you guys very much for coming on.
Delighted to be here.
So just some background. I've known you guys for a while. We've had plenty of conversations through our podcast recordings, through your guys contributing to Cracks in Postmodernity. And I find very interesting the way that both of you come at the concept of celebrity in very particular ways, very much informed by the work that you do, your experience, what you've studied. So I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation because you're bringing some, I don't know, some very unique perspectives to the table. So just before we start the discussion, if we will ask the attendees if you can keep yourselves muted. If you have questions that come up during the discussion, feel free to type them into the chat. We will get to them during the Q&A later, or you can also ask questions out loud once we get to the Q&A section. So I'm going to start by asking us, let's start with your own personal relationships with celebrities, or with the concept of celebrity as you were growing up. Did they matter to you very much? If so, which ones mattered? And then at what point did you start to have a kind of like philosophical or spiritual interest or take on the concept of celebrity? Maybe Tara, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think my relationship to celebrity was pretty stereotypical of a homeschooled theater kid, which is to say, I was an Oscar Wilde obsessive and, very into David Bowie and probably had never heard of any other contemporary celebrity. But the point at which for me, I was interested in dandyism more than celebrity. I wanted to be a dandy and live life as art. And at some point, this transitioned into the academic study of dandyism. So my doctorate is in narrative dandyism and theology and late 19th century French decadent literature. So, I went away from Oscar Wilde and into the older, weirder French stuff. But what interests me about dandyism and then the sort of celebrity iteration of that is the idea of living one's life as a work of art, as a kind of public performance of as either searching for, or I would say that when I was attracted to it for my own self, which is something that is now a couple of decades old and out of date at this point, what I was attracted to was the idea of a kind of holistic unity, that to live life beautifully or to live life poetically or romantically or in this sort of dandiest mode was to subsume everything in one's life to a particular story or a particular vision. And that was something that I think the intensity of that, the holistic nature, is what I thought of as attractive. Um, Intellectually, though, I think both because of perhaps my faith and my philosophical commitments, I've become more and more wary of the kind of self-creation demanded by celebrity culture and the way in which it is not just performative, but which is neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned, but a kind of rendering of one's life as a commodity. Like, what attracted me most to the 19th century dandies as, a theater kid was this idea that one's life could be not just sort of made beautiful or rendered distinct or rendered unique. And what I see to be more and more the case, particularly as we move towards the sort of seemingly democratic social media fed model of celebrity rather than something a bit more remote or godlike, is this idea that any element of one's personal life or one's private life is just sort of fodder for a kind of, whether it's a SponCon deal or bolstering one's personal brand in some way. Like, this is no longer a high art. It's very much a commodity. And that's something that I have strong reservations about. And I will say that also, like, despite being in no way a celebrity myself, having gone through the process, particularly with my first novel, of being encouraged to bolster my personal brand, I became sort of even more suspicious of turning my life into a string of think pieces and personal essays in order to sell books. And that's something that I constantly find myself negotiating in my fiction half of my writing life.
Yeah, and I think what's most interesting about self-made is that you're offering this historical perspective of how the notion of celebrity first emerged, how it's developed over time. I think absolutely when we see in the social media age, it's kind of exploded. It's gone it's reached levels that I don't know. I doubt Oscar Wilde or Gabriele D'Annunzio would have foreseen. So in a moment, I'll ask you to just expand a little bit more on the thesis of your book. But David, if you can answer the initial question about your relationship with celebrity.
Yes, and I have a lot of things I want to say based on what Tara just said. But yes, listen, I'm a gay child who grew up in the 90s, and I was collaging, Entertainment Weekly and People magazine when I was in sixth grade. And celebrity, in terms of the girl power era, celebrity was so important because while the girl power era was happening, there was also the rise of anime, and there was just a lot of pop iconography happening with the Spice Girls and Britney Spears and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Destiny's Child and TLC, etc. So it was a really rich and verdant time. And then when I entered middle school, which was September 11th, Bush era, and we took like kind of a dark nosedive into hypermasculinity, that sort of idealized celebrity culture was kind of one of many bastions that I took refuge in. So yes, and in the last few years, as I've become an astrologer and more of a mystic initiate, as I've studied more and more world religions and esoteric spiritual practices, and as I've learned about the tarot and all of these kind of mystical and spiritual and cultural archetypes, the way that they're transmuted into our celebrities now usually just clicks for me very instantly. So, as I'm studying some of these, the queen or the king or the hierophant, etc., of course I'm going to be thinking about Madonna or Britney Spears, etc. So, yes, for me, it's very present.
Yeah, so again, I think we're seeing a lot of overlap, even though you're coming from this topic from very different experiences, perspectives. You see, yeah, these kind of the deification of these figures, especially as you said, David, during the 90s, we see this whole kind of revolution, which I want to ask you to get into more in a second. But yeah, so Tara, back to self-made. Tell us basically, if you can summarize the thesis of your book, and also if you can emphasize, I mean, you mentioned some of the downsides to how the notion of celebrity has evolved during the social media age. Maybe you can also
So
say some of the positive things that have emerged out of this kind of
absolutely. Yeah.
self-making. Yeah.
So Self-Made, my most recent nonfiction book, which came out about a year ago, is basically this double helix of a history of these two ideas of self-making. The one perhaps more common in the United States, the self-made man, increasingly the self-made person, the person who through hard work and grit and good old-fashioned American values, makes themselves a billionaire. And the other figure that's sort of more traditionally associated with European with Europe is the dandy, the figure who lives life as art. And the argument of this book is that these are two sides of the same coin, and they're downstream of a distinctly modern shift in the modern, let's say in Europe and then America. So it's sort of qualify that statement a bit, but it's an idea of the self where what makes us us, authentically us, is not given facts about ourselves, where we are born, how we are born, our social station, and so on, but rather our sort of internally felt sense of desire, who we want to be, and that this is this which allows us to kind of transform ourselves into a truer version of ourselves, which is a version we have in our own mind, whether this is sort of in pursuit of wealth or in pursuit of one's public image. And increasingly, and this is sort of very much a theological argument, I'm a theologian by training, bound up in the relocation of authority from traditionally the church or religious institutions to the individual self. But it's also bound up, particularly from the 19th century onwards, with this kind of sacralization of desire, the sense that our longing for something might in fact constitute some kind of quasi-magical or magical force. So I'm extremely excited when we veer into the astrological and magical elements of this talk, because you see this in particular in the 19th century in the United States, and movements like New Thought, this kind of spiritualized self-help vision of, basically an early law of attraction. You see it in a slightly different way in Europe with the rise of interest in certain kinds of sort of occultism, like in the works of Joseph and Paladin. But more generally, there's the idea that we can become who we want to be. It becomes bound up with this idea that there are certain superior, perhaps godlike individuals who have the power to not only become who they want to be, but kind of shape reality around them. What is true is what they want to be true, in a way that is perhaps a little bit more than simply being able to manipulate perception, but it's not synonymous with being able to maintain and shape public perception. So, if you are able to convince someone of something, it becomes functionally true. And I think what interests me most about, let's say, post old Hollywood celebrities, or even post TV celebrities, which is where you see another turn of the screw in terms of the democratization of it. That this is something that anyone could conceivably do, rather than the old Hollywood star who is always sort of coded as someone who is just has it already and is picked out of a crowd because their itness is impossible to deny, from the perspective of a casting director or studio boss, to the sort of post-Warhol sense of anyone can become a celebrity. I think what's interesting about this overall philosophical shift and about the contemporary or the post-Warhol turn is that there is something really attractive and perhaps one might say positive in the idea of a certain kind of democracy of celebrity. There are not some people who just have it that are always superior in some way we don't fully understand. And an intention that's always been part of the story of self-making is who gets to be a self-maker, what qualities make them a self-maker, and are they, by virtue of having those qualities, be it beauty or a work ethic or intelligence or what have you, different in kind from those other human beings that don't have that? Is self-making the human condition, or is it the condition of a few humans? And I think that at its best, the sort of apparent democratization of celebrity, the fact that anyone sort of with a iPhone with any phone camera and an internet connection has a shot, or appears to have a shot, does, I think, address, at least on the surface, this sort of inherent instability in the idea of celebrity, that there's just gods who walk among us, and they're absolutely different from us, not just in degree but in kind. But at the same time, I think it's an open question what we're actually talking about when we talk about it. And I think insofar as star power is something that you can tell when you see an actor or actress who has it, and whether we want to call it charisma, we want to call it sex appeal, we want to call it acting ability, we want to call it a certain kind of magnetism, it's worth kind of considering that in its own right and asking ourselves, why is this appealing? Is it different when it is on a different medium? Is it for a smaller screen? Is the same it you have on a big screen black and white cinema the same it you need to have make it on TikTok or what have you? That I'm not sure of. But I think that I do think the downsides outweigh the potential positive sides, which is to say, I think that living a world in which we do not have any kind of private life, where all of our lives, whether or not we seek to become famous, are bound up with a celebrity making engine like social media, where anything we say or do is always in dialogue with the possibility that we might go viral, whether or not we want to. We could have an encounter in a park that propels us into viral stardom or viral, you know, have everyone hate us, and then parlay that into a certain kind of celebrity. And I'm thinking here of the gentleman, the bird watcher in that incident in 2020, whose name escapes me, who like didn't want to be a celebrity and now was able to parlay this into a book, a series on bird watching. Apparently, it's very good. I haven't seen it, but any moment of our lives could put us into a trajectory of our lives being for public consumption, where we may be confronted with the question of figuring out the rest of our lives downstream from having been, even for 15 minutes, even for a day, a public figure. And I do find that really unsettling. I think that so many of the goods of our lives of being a person demand like many spheres of privacy, like personal, intimate, being alone privacy, the privacy of between with we have with partners or nuclear family or friends. And I think when we start to think of the entire world as our audience all of the time, we lose kinds of intimacy and kinds of safety that help us become more robust as people.
Yeah, and what's interesting here, and especially with the fact that you take this historical approach in the book, you really map out how the concept of celebrity really started to become divorced from the real. Like if you take someone like Mozart, he's a celebrity because he's extremely talented. His celebrity was not generated by manipulating the public's opinion or like some kind of media campaign. Now, when you take Wilde or people who came after him, and you take Warhol, these are people whose public images are curated, who are, again, like you're kind of manipulating public opinion, public perception. It's not so much that naturally people recognize something fascinating about this person's abilities, skills.
Mhm.
And I think this is really propelled forward the separation between like the person and the real by mass media, starting with television. I mean, starting with newspapers, I guess we can even say. But then, of course, going into social media, going to phones and whatnot. And I think now I want to go into, so David, you wrote this really fascinating piece in the Iffy about Britney Spears and the Free Britney movement. We discussed it further on my podcast like 2 years ago. And I think one of the most fascinating things you said about Britney is that this is one of the first singers whose celebrity is really predicated on her fame, the persona of Britney Spears more so than the music itself. I mean, we could say Madonna was kind of a precursor, but still, I think you said there is something more like there's still a fascination with the music that she made. And I think, I don't know, like MTV, television in general played a huge role in Britney's fame. So if you could say a little bit more about what you saw changing within the career of Britney Spears.
Well, it's interesting because, my guess is this, which is Madonna was really in dialogue with her Catholicism and with these sort of religious archetypes that were dominant in the 20th century. By the time Britney came around, religion in at least the American consciousness was less of a powerful force. And by that point, even the president, Bill Clinton was this sort of lifestyle president. So these sort of bigger institutions, which is like the political sphere or the religious sphere, were kind of fading away. And when you look at someone like Britney Spears, she had to occupy everything, which is kind of what we're seeing now, I think. It's like the devotion that fans felt to Britney, it's not just, oh, I was a teen and I love that music. They really are acolytes. Those people who were outside of the courthouse, demanding that she be freed. It's not these aren't the same sort of stands that we think about or just kind of a traditional fan. They really are going towards their Messiah. I mean, there's kind of a pilgrimage. And, it's interesting. I was reading, Tara wrote on your Substack that really amazing piece called The Dark Side of Self-Making, which I know takes from your book. And you were talking about Beau Brummel, who is I hope I'm saying it right, Beau
Yeah.
Brummel,
Oh yeah.
who
From
was a dandy who was such a like class act and so good at being famous for the sake of being famous that he was able to like publicly make fun of Prince George, who had become King George the
yes.
Fourth. And even with him, we're thinking about, I was just thinking about that idea that it's this famous person who's in a dialogue with a bigger institution. He's in a
Mhm.
dialogue with the monarchy, which is the same thing as the church. Now it's almost like the celebrity has to be everything. It's not even, they're not satirizing or they're not presenting some sort of an argument or a dialogue with those things. They are the church, they are God, etc. This weekend I went on a date, and this is on me, but I went on a date with a 23-year-old. I'm 34. He told me that his desire is to become a self-love influencer. And I don't want to criticize that too much, and I know it comes from I think it comes from a good place, but there wasn't any sense of I don't know, what you were just saying, Tara, really made me think about this. He's already self-cannibalizing.
Mhm.
There's this sense of he's already trying to dig out the thing so he can become this full entity, and he's digging out the guts of his own lived experience, which isn't very much. And unlike maybe what we were talking about with dandies or these people who were maybe playing with the institutions that were around and saying, I'm representing art or I'm representing satire. I think this new class of self-made celebrity, of which, by the way, I have whored myself out and continue to whore myself out. And as my book comes out, I'm being asked to humiliate myself. So I'm not really one to talk, but there is a sense that you are wanting to become, there isn't enough self-awareness, and there aren't any countervailing institutions. So the new celebrity wants to be at that level of a fully public entity whose entire life is exposed and for which there's nothing left, which, by the way, all of the previous celebrities warned against. Britney Spears, Elizabeth Taylor, et cetera, are all warnings against this.
Yeah, so and David, there's something you say in this article. You say that let me read it just to make sure I got it right. So you say fans are something else. Fans are something different. They don't want an identity or a hobby. They want God. So again, there's this in fandoms we do see this religious devotion, and I think this is something Tara talks a lot about in several of her books. But in this kind of disenchanted age, this secular age, where religion does play a different perhaps less public role in everyday life. Most people don't think about the relationship with singers, with actors, etc., as a religious kind of thing. Sure, they would say that they love them, that they adore them, but like few people would put it in those words. And I'm wondering, I mean, first I'd ask David if you could expound a little bit more on this, but maybe Tara, if you can say something about like what are the risks of not recognizing the religious dimension of our relationships with these celebrities? What might be, yeah, like what are the consequences of this? And so David, do you want to just like say a little bit more about
Yeah, I'd love
But
to
this
start.
line, like why are you saying that fans want God? They're looking for God.
For me, I know a lot of gay men who, I actually know quite a few gay men who just flew to see Taylor Swift, I think in Amsterdam. And there was just this sense of like, yeah, let's just do something fun, and this is the thing. And that's fine. That's like, there's nothing wrong with that. However, I've been to brat parties where people, including me, are screaming. And if you were to talk with me about something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like I've had friends or coworkers be like, "Oh yeah, 90s nostalgia, haha, Buffy." And I'm like, "No, this for me is a really, I talk about it with a lot of reverence." So, I think neither is this isn't really a moralistic thing, but I've been to Comic Cons where I've seen adult women where just hearing the name David Tennant, he wasn't even in the Comic Con. Hearing the name of David Tennant, who's an actor who played Doctor Who, I saw screams and ululating. I mean, real screams, not like a little scream, like really feverish madness almost. So, there is this sense that I think we all do have this sort of, even though religion in terms of the public sphere has maybe is not as prominent, I think we all still fixate and we all still seek that, either that king or queen or that rabbi or priest or priestess to fulfill that role. And when it comes to like true fandom, which by the way, Taylor Swift does have that. When it comes to true fandom, as opposed to I think standom, which is a bit more of like a performance of fandom, when we're talking about real fandom, there is that sense of like, no, this person is doing something for me. They're fulfilling me. They're completing me. They're giving me something to worship. I don't think that desire to worship has gone anywhere. I think everyone still has it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a point that Charles Taylor would definitely agree with. Tara knows a lot about that. But yeah, what are the risks of this, Tara? Like, what happens when we don't really acknowledge the religious implications of our fandoms?
I mean, I think the something a distinction I want to draw here, and I think that different fandoms are probably different in degree about this, is what are we talking about when we talk about a religious sort of sensibility? And I think that the biggest one or the most obvious one is the communal aspect, the ritualistic of the communal aspect, where you know it's what is it you can't be part of it. You might be a fan in isolation, but you're not part of a fandom. And I think it's often the case in fandoms. And I don't actually know enough about Taylor Swift specifically to make any statement about her fandom. It's often the case in fandoms that like the thing that keeps you in it is not the person themselves. It's the people you meet on the forums and the friends you go to the concert with, or the friends you do the zine with, or the fanfic with. And so the all the community around it, the community drama, the sort of personalities involved becomes sort of so much a part of one's life that the kind of the occasion for it is almost immaterial. It could be anything. And I think that in the cases where fandom is that or is primarily a kind of mechanism for collective effervescence, like the issue the open question then is like, what about those other parts of traditional religious observance? What about like an actual metaphysic or an actual ethical set of precepts or a sense of what is actually true? Which is not to say that one should construct a theology around Taylor Swift, but simply that some you're sort of outsourcing elements of what have traditionally been considered fundamental human needs to one individual or one fandom or one community in a way that sort of leaves other elements of our lives and selves exposed. Now, that being said, I do think it is the case with particular fandoms where they do take on, for whatever reason, because of the nature of the medium, often a kind of more theoretical or philosophical role in addition to a sort of collective effervescence fandom. I'm thinking particularly here about something like Harry Potter, and I think maybe it may well be that books and worlds kind of can do this in ways that individuals can't. But the way in which the so many readers of Harry Potter in the early 2000s and then later kind of post J.K. Rowling cancellation looking back would ties so deeply their sense of the moral, the good, the moral lessons we learned from Harry Potter about being true to yourself or what have you. Um, that was, I think, a fandom where there was a kind of theological or moral architecture alongside excitement about like these characters. Um, and I'm curious whether certain singers or certain songwriters have enough of a kind of, sorry, the started raining so loudly outside my window. I thought someone was knocking, but it's just raining. Um, I think there are, you know, my sense is that people have this about Taylor Swift in particular, that there's some way in which her way of being in the world is more than just excitement at her music or even her personality, that there's sort of a rich field of discussion that could be had. But I do think that often what celebrity fandom does is provide us with some like an object of reverence and community, but doesn't really necessarily do the rest.
I want to respond to that if that's okay, Stephen.
Yeah.
You know, what's interesting about someone like Britney Spears, I think your point about the communality of fandom is right on, because Britney Spears has not been canceled, but she is really actively, as far as I can tell, trying to push this off. She does really not, she's kind of done with being in the spotlight. But this machine, obviously there's a bigger machine, which is, you know, the industry that wants to profit off of her. But the machine of her fandom is so activated because they just went through this whole saga with her. They've brought this thing into the public eye. We have these documentaries. So the fandom is still ravenous and salivating because they formed these connections and they formed this kind of biome around her. Meanwhile, the deity at the center of it is trying to exit. So it's interesting, and I totally agree with you on that, Tara. I think that's such a fascinating aspect of it, and I think that is what Taylor Swift has, which is it is bringing it has some sort of a communal aspect that's really working and bringing in large swaths.
Yeah, and before we get to the big Taylor question, which everyone's waiting for, I have a confession. While I was traveling the last few weeks, I read the autobiography of Paris Hilton, which was actually, I have to say, it was pretty riveting. I don't know how much of it she wrote, but whoever wrote it, it was, yeah, I mean, so she addresses the fact that when she first kind of came onto the public scene, the line that one journalist used to describe her was that she was famous for being famous. So this kind of goes to, to David's point about Britney, how she's one of the first mainstream singers whose celebrity is completely generated by the fact that there's this hype around her, more so than the fact that she makes music. And Tara makes this point in Self-Made. Like, if you take someone like the Kardashians, and what do? They're, I mean, kind of like, in Paris was kind of the precursor for them. And it was interesting in the book how she talked about her relationship with Britney and how they supported each other. And she did mention the famous paparazzi shot when it was Paris, Britney, and Lindsay Lohan in this car. Um, and she mentions that like some people said it was the unholy trinity of pop or of celebrities. And I did want to mention though, like kind of touching on what Tara's saying about the religious implications of celebrity. There is this photo of Lindsay Lohan, one of the members of this trinity, as I guess she's passed out. I don't know if it was a breakdown or she was drunk in a car. And somebody like superimposed the image of Saint Teresa of Avila on ecstasy, the famous statue. And I don't know, like it's a meme, but at the same time, you kind of see there is this kind of ecstatic dimension to celebrity, but also this there's a darkness, there's a spiritual, I don't know, you could say even a diabolical dimension where you see that the celebrity, because they are not a god, they are human, they do collapse. And rather than having this ecstatic relationship with the divine, they have this kind of breakdown. And Lindsay is one of many figures like this. And in the autobiography, Paris does say like there is something seemingly ecstatic about being a celebrity, or the hype around being a fan of these celebrities. And again, this question, like, where does it ultimately take you? Like, does it promise you this kind of lasting fulfillment that most religions promise? I don't know, but I mean, it is. I would say it's worth reading. It's a lot of food for thought. Um, David, do you want
Right.
to jump in? Or
Go
do
ahead,
you?
Tara. I can go
Oh
after.
yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's something that I'm curious about and curious to hear you talk about, David, is I'm trying to find the word because occult sounds so like I'm immediately, trying to ban Harry Potter in 1997. But the slightly magical nature of celebrity, that there is something uncanny that seems to be rooted, the more that celebrity gets divorced from talent in a particular skill,
Yeah.
even if that particular skill in the sense of an actor or performer is like galvanizing crowds by making us think things that, or making us think things that aren't true convincingly, in a setting where that's sort of acknowledged to be the case on screen, on stage, to celebrities simply capturing our attention as people outside of official performance. The more that happens, I think the more the essence of like what celebrity is actually comes into focus, which is this ability to um feel what sort of might be described as the energy or the vibes in a given space, or sort of affective uh something, and to harness them and control them. And I don't think you have to have like a metaphysically magical view of the world. uh you can use many different vocabularies to describe what is happening. But what interests me is that there is, especially now when like the language of energy and the language of vibes and the language of manifesting is so tied into how many of us, regardless of our religious backgrounds, kind of collectively talk about everything. That there is that nature of the celebrity, that there's someone who may not know, like they may not even be consciously doing this, but they're able to capture our attention, give us something we want, and bend us to their will, and or make us buy things, or make us want to be like them, or make us want to watch them. And that, and I think this is why, in the age of what we're, well, a little bit after, but the sort of, I think the Trump presidency and the not just 2016 as an election, but the media machine that sprung up around Trump before, during, and after his first presidency, uh, did kind of intensify this broader cultural truth. I think that attention is such a currency now. It is a sort of form of energy manipulation, that those people who are able to draw it and to capitalize on it, do have a kind of not a kind of power that is not backed up either by like tradition, by any of the traditional ways that power might have been backed up: violence, state support. You have a kind of power of vibes. And that is something that I think does make, I don't know if it casts a pall over the concept of celebrity altogether, but I think it certainly challenges us to think about what actually is going on when we find ourselves drawn to any celebrity.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is what's interesting about Lindsay Lohan, her sainthood, because for me, Lindsay Lohan, because I was 14 when Mean Girls came out, she is so emblematic of my generation, I think, or my generational experience, or certain of the she, in that movie and in that performance and with her voice and the way she looked and expressed herself, I felt like she captured a really indelible kind of darkness and light. And there's this kind of there's something about her that is truly indelible and immortal to me from that time. And it's interesting because they made a new Mean Girls movie, that came out a few months ago or last year. And I don't know who any of those actors are, and I didn't see it. But I just remember when I saw the trailers, I was kind of like, who are and the movie kind of came and went, and there was that thing of like, right, you can crank out actors or ingenues, but there are certain figures who either through the tragedy or through the right place in the right time are there for a reason. They're kind of bringing all of these themes together. And I just watched during the lockdown, I watched Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor for my first time, and then I just watched the Elizabeth Taylor documentary on HBO. And there's an amazing, first of all, she isn't good in Cleopatra. She doesn't bother trying to cover up her patrician wasp accent while she's playing Cleopatra. Anyways, but the movie's amazing, and there's a scene where they're talking in the documentary where they're talking about she's having this extramarital affair with her co-star Richard Burton. It is the scandal of the world. The Pope is talking about her. It's so crazy. And there's a scene in the movie where they're filming in Italy and they're bringing her out on the big Sphinx in front of 1,000 extras. And they were really frightened that these Italian extras who love the Pope were going to boo her, throw things at her. She comes out on the Sphinx, they're screaming and crying, they're in love with her. They're cheering her, and she starts crying. Because no matter what, Elizabeth Taylor is coming out on a Sphinx. She is Cleopatra. She is, that thing that is in that vibe, that thing that can't be described, that if you are a 23-year-old who wants to be a self-love influencer, I don't know that you can, it's not something. Elizabeth Taylor couldn't have aspired to that. It just, there is that chosenness that is, it has to converge at a certain time and represent certain generational interests, etc.
Yeah, I mean that Elizabeth Taylor reference is really, I don't know. I read about it in a book about Fellini and La Dolce Vita, and how that movie kind of was symbolic of the dawn of the age of the paparazzi of modern celebrity. And yeah, I mean it perfectly captures, like, again, why is the Pope talking about Elizabeth Taylor? I think maybe Tara knows this. Do you remember how many photos Camille Paglia clipped out of Elizabeth Taylor? It was some like very random. It
I
was like
do not know that answer to
59.
that question.
That's
She always
fabulous.
like mentions how there's like a very specific number of photos she clipped out of Elizabeth Taylor. So I'm true devotee.
It's fabulous.
Um, but yeah, so let's get to the real question of the hour. What is the deal with Taylor Swift? I mean, first, is she really all that? But also, what is behind the fandom? I mean, people are spending thousands of dollars to go see her. So what do you guys think? What do you guys see?
I I think that everything is so loaded right now. And it's interesting because Taylor Swift and Lady Gaga more or less emerged at the same time. And around that time was when Beyonce entered her kind of evolution. Beyonce, if we're thinking about that 2009 period, that was when, Beyonce had a solo album before, but she was kind of entering her new evolution. And Beyonce, who's kind of this avatar of Black womanhood, and then Lady Gaga, who's this kind of art school queer harbinger, emerge. I think Taylor Swift represents a safe space. I have nothing bad to say about her music or, her as a performer or anything like that. But I think for fans who don't want to say that they need a break from maybe discourse or from envelopes being pushed or from identities being proclaimed, and Taylor Swift has proclaimed herself a feminist, but there is a sort of softness that I think a lot of people either consciously or unconsciously find rapturously seductive. This kind of benign harmlessness, because she's writing love songs, but I don't know that it's it's connected to any of these bigger social revolutions that are going on. So I think she provides a bastion or a refuge. That's what I think.
I'm a I'm fascinated by Taylor Swift. I like some of her songs. I think they're catchy. I don't know enough to have an informed view of her music. I will say, I mean, what I do feel an instinctive pull towards Taylor Swift. Not, I hope for the reasons that you cite, although I'm sure that that is part of her appeal. But the thing that I find really fascinating about her is that that it feels like she's in on a very big joke, which is to say the performance of this just like what who me like sweet little girl next door, when she's sort of so evidently not, to the point of being kind of like unhingedly ambitious, um that somehow there's a level of comedy or irony that I find in all of her the music videos I've seen, or in Shake It Off, or in Wildest Dreams, where some of she's kind of like lanky and not a good, like she's not a good, particularly good dancer, so there is a kind of, there is actually an awkwardness there. But what I find fascinating about her is that she's sort of able to, it always feels like she's playing a kind of clownish role, where we know she's Taylor Swift, she knows she's Taylor Swift, and she's pretending to be this dorky kid who's overlooked by the popular boy, even like many years after that is not reasonable to think of age-wise. Like it's almost like a Mary Pickford baby act. And I find it hilarious because there's a kind of joy to, like I'm not saying anything about her personally. I don't know her personally off, of course. I mean, there was at one time. But it always comes across like she is inviting her fans into this kind of silly joke. And I think that the contrast with Beyonce is that I think Beyonce also has this sort of slightly strange performance. Or actually, no, I want to rephrase it. Beyonce is very openly kind of not the girl next door, and she's always had sort of controls her image, and is open about controlling her image. I remember this when she had her publicity team take some unflattering picture, have people take down unflattering pictures on one of her concerts. That I remembered at the time the sort of sense that fans had that Beyonce was kind of doing a very normal thing that like celebrities would do, tightly control their image, but was not able to signal that she was kind of in on the joke, that this was all a little bit silly. And for whatever reason, my internally felt sense of Taylor Swift is that she presents a kind of a kind of non-seriousness that I find attractive. I don't know if that is what her other fans find attractive, or even if that is sort of remains is something that other people pick up on. But that the like authentic, artificial, authentic, in a weird way, comes across even more uncanny than like Lady Gaga, who's openly artificial, yet somehow comes across less ridiculously artificial than Taylor Swift. It's almost like Taylor Swift is doing effortlessly what Lady Gaga, who I like very much, puts a lot of effort into doing.
Okay, these I didn't expect these hot takes. I don't know. I mean, I'm just like, I guess you could say a Taylor Swift doomer. I just think she's emblematic of the decay of everything. But you've
Why, Stephen? What's
I'm
wrong
with
with
you,
her?
Stephen.
she's boring, and the fact that people worship a boring artist is like sad and a sign of, I don't know. But I mean, what Tara is saying is it's challenging I don't know. I'm just like, I'm not a fan of that type of pop, like the country poppy. Like, that's just not my thing. So maybe that's why I don't like her and think she's boring. But I don't know. I mean, I really should try to give her a chance. I don't get it. Like,
Everybody
I
else
think
underestimates her. She's just a girl next door who needs her love, Stephen.
exactly. Who's like, no, I mean, I have to say, there is an aspect of this which is so beyond her, which is just the stratospheric levels. Her being a co-chair at the Met Gala is unbelievable. I mean, I cannot believe that. So it's like there's the aspect of her and the music, and then there's this aspect of this media machine that I think has chosen her, and there are a lot of questions about, why.
Yeah, and that, like, again, I understand people being fans, but I really don't think the music or her persona are interesting enough that people should be spending thousands of dollars. Like, I think, yes, like, I do like Beyonce's type of music, but I also think she is so larger than life. That, like, she is someone who is deific, who is somebody, like, you understand why people worship her. And, like, I get the appeal of the girl next door kind of thing, but, like, the fact that you go wild over, like, the everyday kind of person like that, maybe it's not a bad thing. It's just shocking to
But I
me.
don't
Like,
know, like what I don't know that many. I mean, I'm trying to think of the pre, like who does warrant that. And let's leave aside like Mozart composer level genius. Like,
mhm.
so we can talk about opera singers don't get that necessarily anymore, except outside the opera specifically. Cher, like who in the previous generation of celebrity uh has the pull, and why. And it's hard also to tell now because I think so many of that like people in Cher's generation also have the almost a sense of like they've they have not aged, they've aged into a role of elder, not in the sense of being old exactly, but that their life experience and their sense of being a pro is part of the appeal. Like Cher almost belongs with like a Patti LuPone in that capacity. But I don't know, the idea that you would get up and pay thousands of dollars to hear anyone sing, given that like music being good in the sense that maybe a classical musician might call good, or like music being transcendent or virtuosic or having an opera range, like what why should someone spend thousands of dollars to go hear anyone just sing a pop song?
Yeah. I mean, David, you and I talked about this. And what about like Mariah and Whitney, who are like really great vocalists? And also, I mean, Mariah really works this whole concept of celebrity in a very particular way. Whitney, not as much, but yeah, I would not spend thousands to see them. I would not spend money to see Mariah Carey today because I think her voice is shot. But like, those are really talented
Yeah.
people, you know? I don't know. Can you think of other people, David?
I mean, Madonna invented the arena tour. Like,
Mhm.
Blonde Ambition is the first tour of its kind, which is a spectacular, which is costumes, video, dancers, music, themes. It's the first. What Madonna invented with that, with Jean-Paul Gaultier and a lot of other people, Beyonce and Taylor Swift then took from. But
Mhm.
with Madonna or with Cher, there is the aspect of their sex symbols, and their fashion is always evolving, and there are new eras and epochs. And with Taylor, we get those eras and epochs, but they just seem a little bit more. And actually, Tara, you're really making me think about it. Like, maybe there is a satirical joke element to it, and maybe, right, maybe all of these people who are on the internet all day and being cynical and snarky and self-aware, there is an aspect of liking Taylor that's a little bit silly, or like overly earnest or chuggy, that is, it's so self-aware that it goes back to being not self-aware at all, and that's like we're in some sort of a dissonant loop. That
Yeah.
might be it,
Yeah, she's not a diva, and like in the way that like Whitney is a diva, Cher is a diva, and we kind of like there is a like Madonna's a diva, and like what is weird is like Taylor's not, and I can't even imagine Taylor aging into being a diva. Like even like Lady Gaga, my favorite Lady Gaga is her like rebrand into like Tony Bennett duets, where she kind of decided, all right, it's my diva era, and I'm now basically Cher, and that works. But I can't like I don't know how Taylor Swift doesn't like ages into something other than just sort of keeping the youthful girlish, again Mary Pickford esque aesthetic to a point where at some point, like if Taylor Swift is 50 and still singing like "This Boy Broke My Heart," it is going to be very like it could work. I'm willing
Yeah,
to say that I would want to like watch that, but
you're
I
right,
don't.
because in the same way, frankly, like Paris Hilton is kind of doing that now, which is like she's now doubled down so many times on the Paris Hilton satirical creation that she invented in 2003 that it's always going to work again because she's saying, I believe in this, even though we know it's a joke, we know it's an invention. And so then we have to. So, yeah, Tara, you are making me see it in a new way.
Yeah, no, I'll admit I am challenged by these points, and I know I need to revisit her catalog. You know
Um,
what I'm wondering? Why doesn't someone like Adele have a fandom? I think it's because she's a singer. Like that's her brand. She's a really good singer, and that's not really people respect her, but I don't think people like are, falling over for her. I don't know.
I mean, I'm
Adele,
surprised only she's quite private, isn't she? Too.
exactly.
But
She
yeah,
doesn't
but she
care.
also has she has. I mean, if I recall correctly, like a really bad divorce. Like she has a kind of things that combine with her image. Like one could
Hmm.
imagine people really caring about her and wanting the best for her and getting overly invested in that way. But
Interesting.
Yeah, Adele doesn't care. Adele will be happy to release an album every 6 years, and she doesn't care. I mean, with Taylor
Hmm.
Swift, or even like, with someone like J.K. Rowling, who's so into the internet, they're very tapped into the internet. They're very much doing this show. I don't think someone like Adele cares.
Yeah, fair. That's fair.
Which is
Yeah.
also like, kind of maybe that's what we should all aspire to, which is like
Well, yeah.
having a talent, being celebrated for it, and also being able to like go to your estate for 5 to 6 years at a time, like Enya, etc.
right.
Oh wow, I forgot about her. Yeah. Well, okay, before we open this up to Q&A, I do want to ask one last question. David mentioned this. Can someone explain Brat? What is Brat Summer? What is going on? I see it everywhere. I tried listening to the album. I don't get it. I really don't understand what's going on. David, can you attempt?
Okay. So yes, I have loved Charlie since the beginning. I saw her in 2012 open for Marina and the Diamonds, so things have really changed. Um, Charlie really does like satire, and she's very open about that. Like we don't need conspiracy theories with Charlie. She's very clear that she likes to play a role. Brat is about it girl culture. It's not really about celebrity culture. It's specifically about it girl culture. And it's about like the idea, I think, of the internet it girl who's kind of like these tragic camp figures who are destined for doom. And I just think at this cultural moment, because Brat is so, the album is meant to be kind of, there's a silliness to it. It's saucy, but it's also very catchy. And it has that it girl thing of like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm posing. It's all a posture while the world is kind of melting. For some reason, it's catching on. However, when I saw that like Kamala Harris was going on with it, I was like, okay, this I never saw coming, and I don't really know where we flew off the handle here. You
I
know?
mean, I just thought that her campaign managers thought that that would be a way to like get the youth to care. I don't know if it's working. Might.
Great, great.
Why not? I still
Why
don't
not?
know.
Why not?
I'm
I
surprised
mean,
it's working. Like it appears to be working. Like I would have assumed that would immediately be deeply cringe to like have
Yeah.
any presidential campaign. I feel like there were times that Hillary Clinton's campaign attempted to do some kind of like meme thing, and it looked
hmm.
like the parents trying to dance at the kids' high school dance, and yet this doesn't seem to have had the same effect.
No. I mean, I don't want to get too political, but I will just say it's interesting how it felt like the MO amongst like young people in terms of, the vice president. Most of what I hear is like criticism of her like prison policy and like enforcement of marijuana laws. Like that tended to be the the hot take on her. And now it's like her campaign managers realize like you gotta make her cool, like appealing to the youth. So like why not use brat? Why not use this coconut thing? Um, so I don't know, it's just like funny to me how these people manipulate public opinion. Now through memes, now through these very banal like internet phenomena.
And I
I
think Brat
that's
is banal. Like Brat is Charlie being like,
yeah.
this is banal, which I think is what made it. And then I think when people take it literally, like I've had people come at me about Brat, and I've been like, you're talking about a literalistic reaction to Brat that a lot of people are having, but the album itself and Charlie, I think, are very much in on the joke.
Hmm. Okay. Well, if any of our viewers want to jump in, ask a question, you can either type it in the chat, you can unmute yourself and ask out loud. Um, yeah, if anyone wants to ask, go for it.
Yeah, hey guys, I have a question. So one of the things that I was intrigued about when I saw this posted on your Instagram, Stephen, was like the state of celebrity culture today. So let me give you a little bit of background of like why that intrigued me. It's because like I work for an advertising agency, and part of my job is to analyze culture and understand how brands can be relevant in culture. So I have junior strategists who I work with in my department. And once upon a time, say 10 years ago, junior strategists that I would work with were looking at culture, and they were intrigued to understand like what are the fundamental human sort of like needs underneath the surface of culture, and how are those showing up in the context of behavior today, whether that's like on social media, whether that's in like the actions of celebrities, this sort of thing. Cut to today, the junior strategists that I work with are more along the lines of kind of this like 23-year-old David that you had the pleasure of meeting recently, who wants to be a happiness influencer or a self optimism, whatever it was that you were saying.
Yeah.
Junior strategists today are looking at culture and saying, what is culture is what celebrities are doing. Suddenly, we could unpack this in a number of different ways. Clearly, the lack of critical thought being applied being one of them. But like, I guess that gets me to the question of like something has changed in the cultural understanding of maybe a certain type of young person who is looking at celebrity and saying what celebrities do is culture, and culture is celebrity behavior. And I don't think this is universal to every sort of younger person, but I think it's very interesting that there's no longer a question of like, what is the human desire underneath, or what is even the cultural sort of current that this thing that a celebrity is doing is traveling in. So I guess like one question that I have for you guys is like, do celebrities create culture? Do they have the power to do that? Or are they just participants in forces beneath the surface? Or, as you guys have kind of talked about, David, I loved how you were talking about Britney as like the deity who is trying to escape from her like deification. Are they essentially just like products of cultural production that have been created as objects or as brands or as like ladders of profit? And are they merely sort of like symbols in a culture of consumption? I just love to kind of hear you guys reflect on like what is the role of celebrity in creating culture today?
To begin, I just want to say I was just thinking about this because when you watch these documentaries Any documentary on HBO about an old slash dead actress I have seen. And if you look at the life of someone like Debbie Reynolds or Elizabeth Taylor, when they got signed by a studio, they took horseback riding lessons and elocution lessons, and they had all of that provided for them so that they could represent the studio and be a better actor and do, all the promotion they were supposed to do. And they were terrorized. Their lives are owned by these studios. They're hounded by fame. However, I cannot imagine if you were Elizabeth Taylor and you had to have an Instagram account and you had to do these ridiculous posts that people are expected to do. All of us are expected to do now. I mean, I agree with you. Something has changed. It's more invasive because you're now going into these people's homes and they're now having to do promotion on top of promotion with their own lives at the center of it. So I do just want to say, I think what you're saying is very astute, that it has gone way deeper in a way that would have seemed outrageous a few decades ago.
Yeah, I agree with David. I think the level, I think the illusion of a celebrity having individual power is much higher, because hypothetically speaking, anyone can say what you feel authentically into Instagram stories, and you don't need the horseback trainer and the elocutionist. I think in practice, it's probably the case that you've got a whole PR team behind you crafting your post and what have you, to the extent that I don't know that there are very many celebrities who can, quote unquote, authentically, which is to say, or at the very least, without a giant team behind them, move the cultural needle. But I think that I wonder whether what you're experiencing as this cultural shift is also part of the fact that 10 years ago, if in any kind of advertising agency, one would not necessarily have had the kind of in-depth data that we can now have about every aspect of the performance of any part of celebrity culture, which is to say, how some lady Taylor Swift posts something on Instagram, and we know exactly North Dakota, women who are 26-year-olds in North Dakota like this more, and Asian American women in Flushing between the ages of 30 and 36, you didn't click this link. And I think we have so much data about who is clicking where and when, and how we can sort of micro optimize for certain kinds of performance and certain kinds of categories, that these sort of questions of the question of what do we, quote unquote, want culturally speaking, or what do people want, I think is easier to elide, or perhaps even falls apart when you have the ability to kind of hyper target performance. And that's not to say it always works necessarily. I would imagine there's many cases where attempting to use the data to make a hyper specific message, or to, advertise this because, pretty much every time, certainly in the publishing industry, that there's we all like books with girl in the title, where there's a sort of alcoholic, unreliable main character, and you try to do it, and of course it flops. But I would imagine that the amount of ostensible data available to any branding company about the performance of their products and the people who might be promoting them does turn it into a different kind of game and incentivize different ways of thinking about the relationship between people and products.
I just want to say really quickly, one thing I'm always going to be optimistic about is, I don't know, while we've been talking, I've just been thinking about Cardi B, and I've also been thinking about Whoopi Goldberg, who are these two. Whenever I think of just people who can't really be replicated, who kind of came out of nowhere and just did create, Cardi B created culture. She came out of nowhere. She did create, she birthed a lot. I do think it's going to be harder for these anomalies to emerge because of everything Tara just said and because of everything you so well said so well, Justin. But I'm always going to be optimistic that like, yeah, there's always going to be something that this data can't predict, and when it arrives, we're all going to say, "Oh, finally," because I didn't know I wanted this, you know, which is what those women do.
Interesting. Yeah, so are there any other questions anyone want to jump in? Bang.
Yeah, I had a question. So, during a lot of talk about celebrities today, we often hear of this idea of like the parasocial relationship. I was surprised no one brought it up during the talk, but just this idea that relationships between like the average person and the god or the celebrity is it's one-sided, but it's also in a sense that the celebrity is in a relationship, a sort of friendship with the fan through like social media, through the fan being able to see like what the celebrity is doing, like through an Instagram story or a TikTok reel, where the celebrity keeps putting out content that is supposed to replicate their daily life, which which makes the person in the parasocial relationship think that those two are somewhat friends with each other. I'm not sure if this is like a phenomenon that just came out of social media or if it was a thing in the past. Like if I was a fan of Richard Wagner and I wasn't Nietzsche or something, I was just like a regular person. Like I would just see Wagner do his plays and it would be one-sided, right? Like Wagner is just like a mythical figure to me, carrying out whatever plays he was doing. But now it's like if any of these celebrities had events today, I would be able to see this person as someone who has desires to eat or drink or watch TV just like you and me through social media. And I'm just wondering like how that has changed the way we think about celebrity today, the parasocial relationship, the way like we have increasing access to celebrities at the same time that celebrities are being much more, I would say, larger than life than ever before because they can now control the world through mass telecommunications.
Actually, can I jump in? I mean, I have a lot to say about Yang's
And
question
and,
because
and I was wondering if there's a connection between the parasocial relationship and people talking about relationship with God. Like,
yeah.
are people in
Mhm.
parasocial relationships with God? Because I say, yeah, my relationship with God, my relationship with Jesus, where I'm walking with Jesus, but Jesus never really talks. Well, I mean, talks to me. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, I get, yeah. When I think back to when I was growing up, like I absolutely had a parasocial relationship with celebrities. I fantasize a lot about like the day I was gonna meet these people. And there are a few times where I did actually meet celebrities, and there was this kind of ecstatic experience, like being in front of this person who's, I don't know, like they're materializing, they're incarnating in front of you, and then it's over, and then what? Whereas once I kind of like went on my own religious journey, I started to find, I don't want to be too cliche, but like I do have to say, I found, at least within Catholicism, like having relationships with the saints, but especially having relationship with God. It kind of fulfilled what I was looking for in the relationship, these parasocial relationships with celebrities. And I understand, I mean, Yang has a point. Like, I'm not like on the phone having a vocal conversation with God out loud. But there are experiences I have that like by faith, I believe it is an encounter with the divine. But also, like the aftermath, something continues to live on. It's not like, oh, when I saw Beyonce for the first time and I was starstruck, and then the next day I had to go back to my boring life. It's like when you have a religious kind of encounter, um, it does change my boring everyday life. Like I do look at having to go to work, having to deal with difficult people, in a new light. So I don't know. That's my experience, and it's something I do think about a lot. But I'm curious the others if you want to comment on the parasocial relationship thing and then the God question as well.
I mean, I don't know that I would call celebrities now larger than life. I think that's if anything, I think that there are elements of sort of old glamour that we have largely lost, precisely because I think that what celebrities are expected to do now is this sort of much. I mean, it was always the case that like Mary Pickford would sell cold cream. You know, it's not like there was an era. There's not been an era in celebrity culture that did not involve a little bit of sort of lifestyle branding as part of the overall package. But I think that the assumption of constant access rather than quite managed access to the private lives of, I mean, we've always wanted it. The very first film magazines, they had to publish in the 20s letters to would-be fans saying, do not write and ask who's marrying who. We're not going to tell you. 5 years later, they stopped trying. They just told them. But I think now the expectation of constant access it does lend itself to the fantasy that I think the part of the fantasy of stardom has always been it could be you. You could be the next person plucked out from obscurity. This person has it. Maybe I have it too. You know, in the 20s, you find tons of correspondence courses being marketed saying, you know, we're going to help you get your magnetism so that you too can be discovered. And yet, I think now, in a weird way, the expectation of someone's life, like the idea that someone's life could be laid open for public consumption to the extent that it is for celebrities, personally makes me feel more alienated from them, not less. I think, you know, I watch, you know, maybe I'm older, it could just be that, but of course, I think that there is an element to the part of the fantasy and the mystery of a celebrity is that you can imagine that they're, you know, beautiful and on the red carpet, they're mystical, they're otherworldly, and yet there's some secret about them that makes them deeply, deeply human. And somehow I think the more that is revealed to us, the more we see their messy homes, and especially when there's a kind of very obvious like financial element, you know, we see their messy homes, but luckily they have Lysol to clean it. It makes them to at least seem less real. And I'm curious about what a parasocial, at the same time, I think this probably also depends on like the level of celebrity, whether you're just at that level where you're not famous enough to, you know, that everyone actually wants to see your home, but by wanting to see your home, you're going to get more famous, the sort of influencer tier or D-list actor tier, where responding to a fan's DM is within the realm of like ginning up a fan base rather than this person might be a stalker. I do think that there's probably a lot of bleed in those in that tier of celebrity where, you know, maybe the relationship we have with Taylor Swift is not that different from the relationship we had with the Barbara Stanwyck, but the relationship we might have with Hilary Duff, or, you know, someone who's got a like pretty good some good TV gigs, but like is also largely a lifestyle influencer, or someone who is Caroline Calloway, for example, who came on an Intellect podcast. That level is, I think, something that the internet has made possible, or internet celebrity has made possible, which is parasocial relationships in which would-be celebrities are kind of dependent or vulnerable to some level of back and forth.
Right, because the other aspect is that all of these industries and institutions are going to be going down, and then I think things like Patreon or OnlyFans, which are the fans are directly giving money to the person. It's not going through a music label, etc., does create this bizarre parasocial bond. And yeah, a friend of mine who has a pretty successful podcast has told me that he's run into issues with this, which is that the fans who are directly giving them cash are creating a narrative about them about the hosts of the podcast as if they know them. And it's like, that's not quite what's going on. It's so intimate because you're listening to this person in your ear all day, but it isn't real intimacy. So yeah, Yang, I think like what your bringing up, I feel like we're only at the beginning of it. Like I think it's just going to get, we're going to see this evolve in pretty treacherous ways.
Hmm, interesting. Any last questions before we wrap up? We have like 5 minutes left.
How about kind of a follow on to that? Like you talk about like Patreon and OnlyFans, you talk about like how celebrities, like micro celebrities are minted on social media in the moment, like, you know, summer 2024 featuring Hawk Tuah Girl. Like is in the age of algorithmic sorting, and you were kind of getting to this a little bit, Tara, the idea of like data optimization, algorithms sorting people into their subcultures, connecting them with their micro influencers, their the micro celebrities in their world. Is celebrity actually dying? Like because we've talked about, or you guys have talked about in this conversation, mainly just like mega celebrities. Like we're talking Taylor Swift, we're talking Beyonce, we're talking Madonna level of celebrity. We're talking about celebrities from like a monoculture, Elizabeth Taylor, right? But now in our algorithmically sort of distributed culture, like is the next celebrity that person that gives you that parasocial quasi connection to, where you feel like you're in the 36,000 people on earth that follow and pay for content from this person? Are mega celebrities dead? Like, are Taylor Swift and Beyonce the tail end of what was the monoculture? And is the algorithmic future a bunch of micro celebrities?
I think you probably hunger for a mega celebrity, and I think that it's not. I feel like as soon as I say it's not likely, of course, someone is going to come out of the gate. I think that probably my prediction is that the general way of things is going to be away from a monoculture and towards sort of micro and slightly larger tier celebrities, where the kind of level is part of the satisfaction of following the celebrity is being part of a tribe that has heard of the celebrity or knows the celebrity or is in. And yet I think that there's enough of a hunger for a kind of collective experience, which is what I think happens when like very weird shit goes viral and everyone wants to be in on it. Where like moments of real mass virality where people from a variety of different subcultures get very into this or that or the other thing, I think do speak to the fact that we want something. But I can't imagine who or what could possibly sustainably like hold our attention for more than just 24 hours. Like I can see someone going viral. I think I cannot imagine someone like successfully riding all of the different waves of different vibes and different people hating them for this reason to kind of attain a cult status very easily. And I think if that did happen, or if there were someone able to do, I think as we've said earlier in this conversation, often there's a sort of weird combination of luck, personality, and perseverance. That means that someone will probably be in the right place at the right time to prove me wrong. So what do you think, David?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, like I think that all of us are always going to be searching for friends, and all of us are always going to be searching for a rabbi or a priest. And I agree that these parasocial relationships, especially with micro celebrities or podcast hosts, etc., gives us the some sort of illusion of companionship or friendship. But I do always think people are going to be seeking also the figure to worship, and they're two different kinds of things, but we're going to have both, I think.
So the last question to wrap everything up: who is your favorite celebrity, if you have one?
Do they have to be alive?
No,
Like contemporary
anyone.
celebrities?
Anyone. Isn't that hard?
I think for me, it's Carrie Fisher.
Oh.
Just because like she was born into Hollywood and into fame, and most of her own work was pretty mediocre. But like her ability to be a living parody of everything around her and to just reflect the insanity that was going on around her at all times. I just think no one else did it that way, and yeah, she did it very well.
Okay, Carrie Fisher. Tara.
David Bowie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm
Why?
just gonna return to my teenage theater kid roots.
Okay, fair. That's fair.
Yeah, if you're gonna do it, like go all in.
Yeah, yeah. I can't pick one. I really can't. There are too many. I will say this, right this moment, I'm going through an ironic Little Monsters era. I am becoming obsessed with Lady Gaga again, but like not in a serious way. In like the art pop way. Because I think like art pop is like her ironic album where she like stops taking herself seriously. And yeah, that's where I'm at. But of all time, I think I can't pick anyone. So anyway, all right. With that, Tara, David, thank you guys for coming on. As we said, Tara has several books out. I know she has a new book coming out. When is it going to be? Do we have a date yet?
Several years.
Okay,
You gotta write it first. All right.
well, yeah, there are plenty of books they can read while they're waiting. And David,
Yay.
your book is coming out in March, so look out for that. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you all you guys for joining.
Thank you.
All right, have a
Thank
good
you.
night. Take care.